The dying embers of sunset cast long shadows across the charred remnants of what had once been Isaac Zimmerman's home, as he sat motionless among the ashes, his weathered face blank with shock. Montana Territory, 1876, had been cruel to many men, but it had saved its most vicious blow for him when the Blackfoot raiders came in the dark of night, burning everything he'd built over 7 years to the ground. Isaac hadn't moved for nearly 2 days. His canteen lay empty beside him, his horse long since wandered off to the creek for water. The blackened beams that had once supported his roof now resembled the broken bones of some massive creature. His cattle were scattered or stolen, his barn nothing but a skeleton of scorched timber. The sun was setting on the 3rd day when he heard the approaching hoofbeats. Isaac didn't reach for his Colt. If it was the raiders returning to finish the job, so be it. He had nothing left to protect, nothing left to lose. Mr. Zimmerman? A woman's voice, unfamiliar yet somehow warm despite its uncertainty. Isaac didn't look up, his eyes fixed on a charred photograph frame containing the melted remains of his family portrait, his parents back in Pennsylvania, his younger brother who died at Antietam. Mr. Zimmerman, they said in town you might need some help. The sound of boots hitting the ground, then careful footsteps approaching through the debris. I'm Melanie Blackburn. I rode out from Fort Collins with supplies. Finally, Isaac raised his head. She stood before him, a woman perhaps 25 years old, her dark hair pulled back beneath a practical hat, wearing a riding skirt and jacket that had seen better days. Her eyes were kind but determined, not pitying. She carried a rifle slung across her back and led a pack horse laden with supplies. Don't need charity, Isaac muttered, his voice rough from disuse. It's not charity, Melanie said firmly. It's neighborly, and from what Sheriff Wilson told me, you'd have done the same for any of us. Without waiting for permission, she knelt beside him in the ashes and began unpacking a bundle. When's the last time you ate? Isaac couldn't remember. The attack had come in the night 3 days ago. He'd been returning from a 3-day cattle drive, had seen the glow from miles away, spurred his horse to exhaustion only to arrive too late. They took everything, he said flatly. Not everything, Melanie countered. She pulled out a tin pot and some coffee. You're still here, and so am I. She gathered some unburnt wood from the edge of the property and returned, setting it down between them. Mind if I start a fire? Nights get cold out here. Isaac stared at her. A fire? Lady, you blind? Fire's what took everything. Then it's time fire gave something back, she said simply, arranging the wood. That's how it is out here. Things take, but they give too. Rain floods your crops 1 year, brings abundance the next. Her hands worked confidently, striking a match. Fire destroyed your home, but it'll cook your food and keep you warm tonight while you figure out what comes next. The small flame caught, grew, illuminating her face in the gathering dusk. Something in Isaac's chest loosened just slightly as she handed him a tin cup of coffee. Why are you here, Miss Blackburn? He asked after taking a sip, the hot liquid bringing him back to life slightly. Call me Melanie, she said. And I'm here because I know what it's like to lose everything. She stared into the fire. Raiders hit my family's homestead near Laramie 3 years ago. I was in town. Came back to, well, to what you're sitting in now. Isaac studied her face in the firelight. So you ride around looking for burned-out homesteads? A small smile touched her lips. No, I'm a nurse. Or was, during the war. Now I work with Dr. Callahan in Fort Collins. Sheriff mentioned you when I was delivering medicines yesterday. Said you were a good man who'd had bad luck. She shrugged. Thought maybe my experience might be useful to someone in your situation. And what was your experience, exactly? Melanie looked up at him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. That you can sit in the ashes for days, wishing you'd died too. Or you can stand up and build again. Simple as that. No, she said softly. Not simple at all, but necessary. Isaac fell silent, watching the flames dance between them, the first fire he'd allowed near since the raid. Something about her presence made it bearable, the warmth touching his ice-cold hands as she passed him food. Eat, she instructed. Then rest. Tomorrow, we'll see what can be salvaged. Isaac raised an eyebrow. I've taken a week's leave from the doctor. Unless you'd prefer to be alone. Isaac looked around at the charred ruins of his home, then back at the small, bright fire she'd built. For the first time in days, he felt something other than despair. "No," he said quietly. "I wouldn't." Dawn broke with a gentle hand over the Montana plains, casting long shadows across the remains of Isaac's ranch. He awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented to find himself sleeping under the stars rather than in his bed. Reality crashed back quickly. There was no bed anymore, no roof, no walls. Just the small camp Melanie had insisted on setting up away from the ashes. She was already awake, tending a morning fire with coffee brewing. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the early light. "You slept," she observed, handing him a cup. "First time in days, I'd wager." Isaac nodded, accepting the coffee. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Gratitude hadn't been part of his emotional vocabulary these past days. "I rode out a bit at first light," Melanie said. "Found 4 of your cattle down by the creek, and your horses with them. He seems well, just hungry." Isaac stared at her. "You rounded up my cattle?" A slight smile touched her face. "I grew up on a ranch, Mr. Zimmerman. I can ride and rope as well as most men, though I don't generally advertise the fact." "Isaac," he corrected. "If you're going to save what's left of my livelihood, you might as well use my name." Melanie nodded, then gestured toward the ruins. "I think we should start by clearing what can't be saved and seeing what might be recoverable. Do you have tools cached somewhere?" Isaac thought for a moment. Root cellar might have survived. It's stone-lined, under what used to be the kitchen. They worked methodically through the morning, Melanie proving herself surprisingly strong and capable. The root cellar had indeed survived, yielding a cache of preserved foods, some tools, and a trunk containing winter clothing and a few personal effects Isaac had forgotten were stored there. As the sun climbed toward noon, Isaac found himself watching Melanie as she worked. Her movements were efficient, her demeanor practical, yet there was a gentleness to her that seemed at odds with the harsh landscape around them. "What made you stay out here?" he asked as they paused to drink water. "After your family's homestead was destroyed, why not go back east?" Melanie wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "This is my home," she said simply. "I was born in a wagon on the Oregon Trail. Never knew anything but this country." She looked out across the rolling plains, the distant mountains. "Besides, the East has its own ghosts. Lost my fiancé at Gettysburg." Isaac nodded. "My brother at Antietam. The war took so many," she said softly. "But out here, there's always a chance to begin again. That's what I believe, anyway." By mid-afternoon, they had salvaged what could be saved and cleared enough space to see the foundation of the house. It was still intact, the stonework unharmed by the fire. "You could rebuild," Melanie observed, standing beside him as they surveyed the work. "The foundation's good, with those cattle as a start, and if neighbors help." "Neighbors," Isaac snorted. "Nearest ranch is 15 miles. Harrison's place. Then we'll ride there tomorrow," Melanie said decisively. "In my experience, folks out here help each other when it matters. There'll be a barn raising if we ask." Isaac turned to look at her. "Why do you care what happens to me or this place? You don't know me." Melanie met his gaze steadily. "I know enough. I know you drove your cattle to market and sent half the money to the widow Johnson when her husband died last winter. I know you rode 50 miles in a blizzard to bring medicine when influenza hit the Cheyenne camp north of here. How do you people talk?" she said with a small smile. "Especially to their nurse or doctor. You've built something here besides just a ranch, Isaac. You've built goodwill. Now it's coming back to you." That night, they camped again near the clearing. Isaac found himself telling her about his journey west after the war, how he'd worked cattle drives for years before saving enough to claim this land, how he'd built the house himself, log by log, plans he'd had for expanding, maybe taking on a partner or two. "You'll do it again," Melanie said confidently, poking the fire with a stick. "And better this time." "Maybe," Isaac said, watching her face in the firelight. "If I had the right help." Their eyes met across the flames, and something passed between them, an understanding neither was ready to name. The next morning, they rode to the Harrison Ranch. Frank Harrison was a gruff man in his 50s who had homesteaded in the territory before most others. His weathered face showed shock when Isaac explained what had happened. "Damn Indians," Harrison muttered. "We don't know it was Indians," Melanie countered firmly. "Could have been outlaws. Or rustlers." Harrison eyed her appraisingly, then nodded. "Fair point, madam. Either way, Zimmerman, you should have come sooner. We can help." By the end of the day, Harrison had sent riders to 3 other ranches with messages. Promises of lumber, labor, and cattle to restock came back. Isaac was overwhelmed by the response, having never considered himself close to these neighboring ranchers. "Told you," Melanie said softly as they rode back toward his land. "Out here, we survive by helping each other." "I never asked for help before," Isaac admitted. "Maybe that's why they're so willing to give it," she replied. "Because you've never asked, but always offered." Over the next 3 days, plans took shape. Neighbors arrived with wagons of supplies. A temporary shelter was erected. The clearing continued. Through it all, Melanie worked alongside Isaac, her medical skills proving useful when minor injuries occurred, her quiet strength a constant presence. On the 4th night, as they sat by their fire larger now, more permanent, Isaac finally asked the question that had been building. "Your week's leave is nearly up. What then, Melanie?" She stared into the flames for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I should return to Fort Collins. Dr. Callahan needs me. But, her eyes met his across the fire. "I found something unexpected here." "Among the ashes?" Isaac asked softly. "No," she whispered. "Among what's growing from them." The next day, as they marked out the foundation for the new barn, their hands touched over the measuring line. Isaac didn't pull away, instead letting his fingers close gently around hers. "Stay," he said simply. "Not forever, if you don't want to. But longer. Help me rebuild." Melanie looked up at him, the sun creating a halo around her dark hair. "Are you asking because you need the help? Or for another reason?" Isaac took a deep breath. "Both," he said honestly. "I need the help. But more than that, I need the hope you brought with you." A smile spread slowly across her face. "Then I'll write to Dr. Callahan. He owes me vacation time anyway." That evening, a wagon arrived from town bearing a letter for Melanie. Her face grew serious as she read it. "What is it?" Isaac asked, concern edging his voice. "The raiders who hit your ranch," she said, looking up. "They've struck twice more, heading south. The army's been called in." Isaac felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "They'll blame the Blackfoot, whether it was them or not." "I know," Melanie said grimly. "And there'll be reprisals, innocent people hurt. Unless someone finds out who's really responsible," Isaac said, a hard edge entering his voice. "Isaac," Melanie warned, "you can't go after them alone." "I won't," he assured her, though his mind was already working. "But I need to talk to Harrison and the others. If these raiders are working their way through the territory, we need to organize." The next morning brought more neighbors, and a council was held. 12 ranchers gathered around the fire pit Isaac and Melanie had built, discussing the growing threat. Sheriff Wilson rode out from town to join them. "Army's blaming the Blackfoot," the sheriff confirmed, "but I'm not convinced. Reports say the raiders wore war paint, but something doesn't add up. The Blackfoot haven't raided this far south in years." "Someone disguising themselves," Harrison suggested. "To what end?" another rancher asked. "Drive us off our land," Isaac said quietly. "Notice which ranches have been hit? All homesteaded in the last 10 years. All prime grazing land with good water access." The men fell silent, considering. "The railroad's coming through next year," Sheriff Wilson noted. "Land values will triple. So someone's trying to scare us out before that happens," Harrison concluded. "Then they swoop in and buy cheap." Melanie, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "Who stands to benefit most if these ranches fail?" All eyes turned to her, some surprised to hear a woman enter the discussion. "Beg pardon, madam," Sheriff Wilson said, "but this is men's business." "Is it?" Melanie challenged. "The raiders don't discriminate. They killed 3 women and 2 children in the latest attack." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flashed. "And it seems to me you men could use every bit of intelligence available if you're going to stop them before more die." Isaac felt a surge of admiration. "She's right," he said firmly. "And she asks a good question. Who benefits?" The discussion shifted, names being considered and discarded. Finally, Harrison cleared his throat. "There's Edmund Holloway," he said. "Banker from Denver. Been buying up failed ranches for 2 years now. Offered to buy mine last month for half what it's worth." "Holloway," the sheriff mused. "He's got the money to hire guns. And the ruthlessness," added another rancher. "Foreclosed on the Wilsons last year when they were just 2 payments behind. Right after Mrs. Wilson took sick." A plan began to take shape. The ranchers would organize patrols. The sheriff would telegraph for information on Holloway's whereabouts and associates. And Isaac, who had once served as a scout during the war, would track the raiders' trail south, along with 2 other men who had similar experience. As the meeting broke up, Melanie pulled Isaac aside, her face tight with worry. "You just lost everything," she said. "And now you're riding into danger?" "I have to," Isaac replied. "If I don't, and more homes burn, more families die." He shook his head. "I couldn't live with that." "Then I'm coming with you," she stated flatly. "Melanie, no. It's too dangerous." "I rode with field hospitals during the war," she countered. "I've seen worse than danger. And you'll need a medic if things go badly." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "Besides, I didn't sit by your fire for a week just to watch you ride away." Isaac wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes told him it would be futile. And truth be told, a part of him was relieved. The thought of leaving her behind had been more painful than he cared to admit. "All right," he conceded. "But you stay back when we locate them. Promise me that." "I promise to use good judgment," she replied, which wasn't quite what he'd asked, but he accepted it with a nod. They departed at dawn the next day, for riders heading south along the trail the sheriff had identified from reports. Isaac, Melanie, and 2 men named Thomas and Jacob, both former cavalry scouts. The first day passed uneventfully as they followed the subtle signs of the raiders' passage disturbed earth where many horses had passed, broken branches, occasional campfire remains. That night, as they camped in a sheltered ravine, Isaac found Melanie sitting apart from the others, staring up at the stars. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. "No," she said. "Just remembering. The last time I saw violence like what's coming, it was at Chancellorsville. The hospital tents were overflowing." She turned to look at him. "I don't fear what's ahead, Isaac. I fear what it might do to you to us having just found something worth building." Isaac reached out, taking her hand in the darkness. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. What we're building won't be destroyed so easily." "You're sure of that?" she asked softly. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," he said, echoing her earlier words. "I know you came to a stranger in his darkest hour and brought light. I know you're brave and kind and stubborn as hell." This drew a small laugh from her. "I know that in a week, you've become more important to me than anything I lost in that fire." Melanie's free hand came up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "And you've become something I thought I'd never find again after George died at Gettysburg. A reason to hope." In the moonlight, their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. It was a promise, unspoken but real, that whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them and return together. The next 2 days brought them closer to their quarry. The signs grew fresher, and by the 3rd morning, Thomas estimated they were less than half a day behind the raiders. They proceeded with greater caution now, keeping to cover where possible, sending scouts ahead. It was Jacob who spotted them first, a camp of about 15 men in a secluded valley, their horses corralled in a natural enclosure formed by rock formations. From their vantage point on a ridge, Isaac studied them through a spyglass. "They're not Indians," he confirmed grimly. "White men with paint on their faces. And look there," he handed the glass to Thomas. "Holloway." Thomas peered through the spyglass. "Well, I'll be damned. That's him all right. Recognize him from when he came through our way last fall, offering to buy land." "He's directing them personally," Isaac said, his voice hard. "No hiding behind hired guns. He wants to make sure the job's done right." "What's the plan?" Jacob asked, looking from Isaac to Thomas. "We're outnumbered," Thomas pointed out. "Even with the element of surprise, 4 against 15 aren't odds I like." "We don't need to fight them," Melanie interjected. "We need evidence to take to the sheriff and the army. Proof that it's not the Blackfoot raiding." Isaac nodded slowly. "She's right. If we can get close enough for a better look, maybe even overhear them." "I can do better than that," Jacob said with a grin. "I brought my camera apparatus. If I can set up on that outcropping there, I can get a clear photograph of Holloway with his false raiders. That'll be evidence no one can dispute." The plan was set. Jacob would position himself to take photographs. Thomas would create a diversion if necessary, drawing attention away from Jacob's position. Isaac would get close enough to the camp to potentially overhear conversations that might provide additional evidence. Melanie, despite her protests, was assigned to stay with the horses at their fallback position, ready to ride for help if needed. As dusk fell, they moved into position. Isaac crept through the underbrush, his years of scouting experience serving him well. He found a position behind a large boulder at the edge of the camp, close enough to hear voices clearly. "Hit the McCormick place next," Holloway was saying to a hard-faced man who seemed to be his lieutenant. "They've got the best water rights in the territory. Once they're gone, we'll control the entire eastern watershed." "McCormick's got grown sons," the lieutenant warned. "They won't scare easy like Zimmerman did." Isaac's hands tightened into fists at the mention of his name, but he remained still, listening. "Then don't scare them," Holloway said coldly. "Eliminate them. Make it look like the Blackfoot again. By the time anyone figures it out, the army will have started a war with the Indians and will own half the territory." The casual cruelty of it made Isaac's blood boil. He had heard enough. Slowly, he began to back away, intending to return to the others. But as he moved, his boot dislodged a small stone, sending it tumbling down the slope. The lieutenant spun around, drawing his pistol. "Someone's out there." Isaac froze, then made a split-second decision. He broke cover, running for the trees as bullets splintered bark around him. Behind him, chaos erupted in the camp. Men shouted, horses whinnied in panic. He heard Holloway bellowing orders, demanding they find the spy. Isaac zigzagged through the trees, using every evasion technique he knew. He needed to reach Jacob, to ensure he'd gotten the photographs, then get back to Melanie and escape before the raiders organized a proper search. A bullet whined past his ear, too close for comfort. Isaac dove behind a fallen log, drawing his own revolver. 3 men were pursuing him, spreading out to cut off his escape routes. He fired twice, not aiming to kill but to force them to take cover, buying himself precious seconds. In that moment, gunfire erupted from another direction, Thomas creating his diversion. The raiders hesitated, confused by the new threat. Isaac seized the opportunity, sprinting toward the outcropping where Jacob had set up his camera. He found Jacob hastily packing his equipment. "Did you get it?" Isaac demanded. 3 clear shots, Jacob confirmed, holding up glass photographic plates carefully wrapped in cloth. "Holloway, the fake war paint, everything." "Good. Let's." A shot rang out. Jacob jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain blossomed on his shirt. He collapsed, the precious photographs falling from his hands. Isaac caught him, dragging him behind the outcropping as more bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. Jacob's breathing was labored, blood bubbling from his lips. "Get the pictures to the sheriff," Jacob gasped. "Don't let them win." Isaac grabbed the wrapped plates, securing them inside his jacket. "I'm not leaving you," he insisted, though he could see the wound was fatal, a bullet through the lung. "Go," Jacob wheezed. "I'll buy you time." With a tremendous effort, Jacob raised his rifle and began firing at the approaching raiders. Isaac hesitated only a moment before clasping the dying man's shoulder in silent gratitude, then slipping away along a narrow game trail. He encountered Thomas at their predetermined meeting point. "Jacob?" Thomas asked, reading Isaac's expression. "Damn, did he get the pictures?" Isaac patted his jacket. "He did. His last act. We need to get back to Melanie and ride, fast." They moved through the darkness, using every trick they knew to throw off pursuit. When they reached the fallback position, Melanie was waiting, her face tight with anxiety. She had heard the gunfire. "Jacob?" she asked, already reaching for her medical bag. Isaac shook his head. "No time for that now. We've got the evidence, but they're right behind us. We need to ride hard for Fort Collins." They mounted quickly, spurring their horses into a gallop. Behind them, they could hear the raiders organizing pursuit. Holloway couldn't afford to let them reach civilization with proof of his crimes. The night became a desperate race across the plains. 3 riders against at least 10 pursuers, with a lead that grew increasingly thin. Their horses were tiring, and Isaac knew they couldn't maintain this pace much longer. "There's a canyon ahead," Thomas called out. "Narrow passage. We could hold them there while one of us rides on with the evidence." Isaac nodded grimly. It was their best chance. When they reached the canyon's mouth, he turned to Melanie. "You're the best rider. Take the photographs and go. Don't stop for anything." "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "You must," Isaac insisted, pressing the wrapped plates into her hands. "This is bigger than us now." If Holloway succeeds, innocent people will die, both settlers and Blackfoot. You're carrying the only thing that can stop a war. Melanie looked from Isaac to Thomas, then back again. In her eyes, Isaac saw understanding and resolve replace the fear. I'll bring back help, she promised, taking the photographs. We'll hold them as long as we can, Thomas assured her. Now go. Melanie bent down from her saddle, her hand catching Isaac's face. Don't you dare die on me, Isaac Zimmerman. We have a home to rebuild. She kissed him fiercely, then wheeled her horse and galloped into the darkness. Isaac and Thomas dismounted, leading their horses into the narrow canyon. They found defensible positions among the rocks and prepared their weapons. The night seemed to hold its breath as they waited for the pursuers to arrive. Think she'll make it? Thomas asked quietly. If anyone can, it's her, Isaac replied. She's the strongest person I've ever met. They didn't have to wait long. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Isaac checked his revolver one last time, then settled into position. Here they come, Thomas whispered. The raiders entered the canyon cautiously, aware they were riding into a potential ambush. Holloway himself was among them, his face contorted with rage in the moonlight. Spread out, he ordered. Find them. Isaac took careful aim and fired. One of the raiders fell from his saddle. Thomas's rifle cracked a moment later, and another man clutched his shoulder, cursing. The remaining raiders scattered, taking cover behind rocks and in crevices. Zimmerman, Holloway shouted. I know it's you. Be reasonable, man. Whatever you think you know, I can make it worth your while to forget it. You burned my home, Isaac called back. Killed my neighbors, and I'll pay you 10 times what it was all worth, Holloway replied. Think about it, you could start fresh, bigger than before. All you have to do is hand over whatever evidence you think you have. So you can kill us anyway? Thomas shouted. We weren't born yesterday, Holloway. The banker's face darkened. Then you'll die here. There are 8 of us and only 2 of you. Do the math. The gunfight resumed in earnest. Isaac and Thomas had the advantage of position, but the raiders had numbers. Bullets chipped away at their cover, and Isaac knew it was only a matter of time before the raiders worked their way around to flank them. How much longer do you think we need to give her? Thomas asked, reloading his rifle. As long as we can, Isaac replied grimly. An hour passed in intermittent gunfire. 2 more raiders had fallen to their accurate shooting, but both Isaac and Thomas were running low on ammunition. And worse, Isaac could hear movement along the ridge above them. The raiders were indeed working their way around. They're flanking us, he warned Thomas. I know, Thomas replied. Time for Plan B. What's Plan B? Thomas grinned, despite the gravity of their situation. Remember those dynamite charges I brought for clearing the rock on your new foundation? Isaac's eyes widened. You brought dynamite on this trip? Never leave home without it, Thomas said, producing several sticks bound together from his saddlebag. Figure we can bring down the canyon walls on them. Might buy us the chance to slip away in the confusion. It was desperate, but it might work. They identified a weakness in the canyon wall, a place where the rock was already cracked and unstable. While Thomas set the charge, Isaac provided covering fire, forcing the raiders to keep their heads down. Ready, Thomas whispered, trailing the fuse back to their position. When I light this, we'll have about 30 seconds to get clear. Run for the horses, head west through that narrow gap. It's our only chance. Isaac nodded. Do it. Thomas struck a match, touching it to the fuse. The powder caught with a hiss and began to burn its way toward the explosives. True to his word, Thomas counted to 5, then gave the signal. Now, they broke cover, running in a crouch toward where they'd left their horses. Bullets kicked up dust at their feet, but the raiders' firing was hurried, inaccurate. They reached the horses, swinging into their saddles just as the explosion ripped through the canyon. The ground shook beneath them. Rock and debris rained down as a massive section of the canyon wall collapsed, crushing 2 raiders beneath it and cutting off the pursuit. In the chaos that followed, Isaac and Thomas spurred their horses through the narrow gap and into the open plain beyond. They rode hard for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the canyon. Only when they were certain they weren't being followed did they slow their exhausted mounts to a walk. Think we lost them? Thomas asked, glancing back. For now, Isaac replied. But Holloway won't give up. Not with what's at stake. Then we'd better find Melanie and get to Fort Collins before he regroups. They rode through the night, following Melanie's trail as best they could. Dawn found them approaching a small settlement little more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings. As they drew closer, Isaac's heart leaped. Melanie stood outside the trading post, talking intently with several men who appeared to be soldiers. When she saw them, her face transformed with relief. She ran to meet them, throwing her arms around Isaac as he dismounted. "I thought you were dead," she whispered against his chest. "Nearly were," he admitted, holding her tight. "Thomas had an explosive surprise for our friends." Melanie pulled back to look at Thomas. "Thank you," she said simply, "for bringing him back to me." Thomas tipped his hat with a smile. He'd have done the same. "Now who are your new friends?" "Cavalry patrol," Melanie explained. "They were already at the trading post when I arrived. The photographs convinced their lieutenant to send riders to Fort Collins and to dispatch men to arrest Holloway." "They might be too late," Isaac cautioned. "After our little explosion, Holloway will be running. He knows his plan is exposed." "Perhaps," said a new voice. A cavalry lieutenant approached, his uniform dusty from riding. "But men like Holloway usually have escape plans. If I were a betting man, I'd say he's heading for Denver, where his money and connections can protect him." "Then that's where we need to go," Isaac said firmly. The lieutenant nodded. "My thoughts exactly. I've dispatched men to cover the likely routes. But I could use guides who know his appearance and can identify his men." Isaac looked at Melanie, then at Thomas. "We'll help," he said. "But first, I need to know these photographs are safe." "Already on their way to Fort Collins under heavy guard," the lieutenant assured him, along with sworn statements from Miss Blackburn about what she witnessed and heard. The next 3 days were a blur of hard riding and tense vigilance. Isaac, Melanie, and Thomas joined the cavalry patrol, watching every trail and pass that led toward Denver. It was Thomas who finally spotted Holloway and 2 remaining men at a river crossing, attempting to slip past a checkpoint by using a little-known ford. The arrest was surprisingly anticlimactic. Holloway, for all his ruthlessness in business, proved a coward when facing armed soldiers. He surrendered without firing a shot, though his face was contorted with hatred as Isaac stepped forward to formally identify him. "You've ruined me, Zimmerman," Holloway spat. "No," Isaac replied calmly. "You did that yourself when you decided other people's lives were worth less than your profits." The journey back to Fort Collins took 2 more days. By the time they arrived, the news had spread throughout the territory. Holloway's scheme had been exposed, the false raids revealed, and the Army's planned campaign against the Blackfoot halted just in time. Jacob's photographs, developed by a local photographer, provided irrefutable evidence that would send Holloway to prison for the remainder of his life. Sheriff Wilson met them at the edge of town, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "You did it," he said, shaking Isaac's hand. "Whole territory's talking about it. The governor's sending official thanks, and there's talk of compensation for the ranchers who were hit." "I don't care about compensation," Isaac said. "Just justice for those who died." "You'll get both," the sheriff assured him. "And more. Harrison and the others have been busy while you were gone." "Busy how?" Thomas asked. The sheriff's smile widened. "You'll see." They rode toward Isaac's ranch the next morning, Melanie by his side. As they crested the final ridge, Isaac reined in his horse in shock. Where there had been only ashes and a partial foundation a week ago, now stood the frame of a new house, larger than his previous one. A dozen men worked on the structure, while women had set up cooking fires. Children ran, playing between supply wagons. "What is this?" Isaac asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Your neighbors," Melanie said softly, her hand finding his. "I told you they'd help." They rode down to the building site, where Harrison greeted them with a hearty handshake. "About time you showed up. Been waiting to raise the roof, but didn't seem right without the owner present." "I don't know what to say," Isaac managed. "Say nothing," Harrison replied. "Just grab a hammer. We've got work to do before sundown." The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. The house took shape rapidly under the hands of so many workers. A new barn rose beside it. Neighbors brought cattle to replace those Isaac had lost, refusing payment or promissory notes. "The territory takes care of its heroes," Harrison told him when he protested. Through it all, Melanie remained at his side, directing the interior work on the house, organizing the women who came to help, treating minor injuries, and each night, sitting beside Isaac at the fire that had become their ritual. It was at that fire, the night before the final work was to be completed, that Isaac finally found the words he'd been searching for. "When you first came here," he began, "I was sitting in ashes, ready to die. You built a fire beside me and said fire takes, but it also gives." Melanie nodded, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I've been thinking about that," Isaac continued, "about what was taken and what's been given. I lost a house, but I've gained a home. I lost possessions, but I've found." He hesitated, then pressed on, "I've found love." Melanie's breath caught. "Isaac, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's fast. We've known each other barely 3 weeks. But they've been the most important 3 weeks of my life. I don't want to waste any more time wondering what might have been." He reached into his pocket, producing a simple ring of silver. "I traded my father's pocket watch for this in Fort Collins. It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Melanie whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "I'm asking if you'll stay," Isaac said. "Not as a nurse or a helper or a friend, but as my wife. Build this new life with me, not just this house." Melanie's smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close. Their kiss was witnessed only by the stars above and the fire between them, the same fire that had first brought them together among the ashes of his old life. The new house was completed the next day. As tradition demanded, the neighbors gathered for a celebration, with food and music and dancing on the newly laid wooden floor. Isaac and Melanie announced their engagement, to cheers and congratulations from all sides. "When's the wedding?" Harrison's wife asked, as the women gathered around Melanie to admire her ring. "Soon," Melanie replied, looking across the room at Isaac. "Very soon." They were married 3 weeks later, in the new house they had built together. The local preacher officiated, and neighbors from 50 miles around came to witness the union. Sheriff Wilson stood as Isaac's best man, while Dr. Callahan, who had come from Fort Collins, gave Melanie away. "Never seen a match more meant to be," the doctor remarked during the celebration afterward. "Though I'm losing the best nurse in the territory." "Not losing," Melanie corrected him. "I'll still ride in to help when you need me. But my place is here now." As the guests departed and twilight fell, Isaac and Melanie stood on the porch of their new home, looking out over the land that had nearly been lost. "What are you thinking?" Melanie asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "That I'm the luckiest man in Montana Territory," Isaac replied. "And that sometimes, what looks like an ending is really just a beginning." Melanie smiled, taking his hand and leading him back inside to the warmth of their home and the life they were building from the ashes of the old. 1 year later, spring came early to the Montana Territory that year, bringing with it new growth across the plains and new life to the Zimmerman ranch. The house, weathered now through its first winter, stood strong against the backdrop of distant mountains. Cattle grazed on the lush grass that had sprung up after the winter snows. Their numbers doubled since Isaac had begun rebuilding his herd. In the garden behind the house, Melanie worked among the newly planted vegetables, her movements careful to accommodate her growing belly. At 7 months pregnant, she still insisted on doing her share of the work, though Isaac protested regularly that she should rest more. "The baby won't know how to rest once it's born," she would remind him with a laugh. "I'm enjoying the last of my mobility while I can." The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Isaac was returning from checking the northern fences, his figure silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Melanie straightened, one hand at the small of her back, the other shielding her eyes from the sun as she watched him approach. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart skip, even after a year of marriage. His face, tanned from long days outdoors, broke into a smile when he saw her. "You're supposed to be resting," he called as he approached. "I am resting," she countered. "Gardening is restful." Isaac shook his head, but his smile remained. He had learned long ago that arguing with Melanie about what constituted rest was futile. Instead, he leaned down to kiss her, his hand automatically finding its way to her rounded abdomen. "How are my girls today?" he asked. "What makes you so sure it's a girl?" Melanie challenged, covering his hand with her own as the baby kicked in response to its father's voice. "Just a feeling," Isaac replied. A strong, stubborn daughter, just like her mother. Melanie laughed. Heaven help us if that's true. One stubborn Blackburn woman in your life is enough. Zimmerman woman, he corrected gently. And I'd happily take a dozen more. As they walked back to the house together, Isaac's arm protectively around her shoulders, Melanie reflected on how much had changed in just over a year. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. The new house, larger and sturdier than the original, had weathered its first Montana winter without a draft or a leak. The barn housed not only their horses but 2 milk cows, a half-dozen goats, and chickens that provided eggs enough to trade with neighbors. More importantly, they had built a community. What had begun as neighborly help after the raid had evolved into regular gatherings, shared labor for large projects, a system of mutual support that made the harsh frontier life not just survivable but rewarding. Letter came while you were checking fences, Melanie mentioned as they entered the house. From Thomas. How is the old scoundrel? Isaac asked, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. Melanie retrieved the letter from the table. Prospering, by the sound of it. His new sawmill is operating at capacity. He says the railroad construction has doubled his business. She paused, smiling. And he's engaged to be married. A widow from Denver with 2 young children. Thomas, a family man? Isaac chuckled. Never thought I'd see the day. People change, Melanie said softly, her hand finding his. When they find something worth changing for. Isaac nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He had been a different man before the raid, before Melanie more solitary, more closed off from others. The tragedy that had nearly broken him had instead opened him to possibilities he'd never considered. Harrison rode by earlier. Melanie continued as she moved to the stove, where a pot of stew simmered. Says the cavalry captured the last of Holloway's men near the Canadian border. They were trying to start trouble with the Blackfoot again, but this time no one believed them. Good, Isaac said firmly. Though I expect we haven't seen the last of men like Holloway. There's too much money to be made out here for the greedy to ignore. Perhaps, Melanie agreed. But they'll find us harder to intimidate now that we stand together. That evening, as had become their custom, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. Isaac had built a bench wide enough for both of them, with a back that supported Melanie comfortably. They often spent the quiet end of day here, talking about the future, making plans, or simply enjoying the peaceful beauty of the land they both loved. I've been thinking, Isaac said after a companionable silence. After the baby comes, and once you're ready, we should take a trip. Melanie looked at him in surprise. A trip? Where to? East, he replied. To Pennsylvania. I'd like my parents to meet their grandchild. And you? Melanie's face softened. I'd like that. They've been so kind in their letters, but it would be wonderful to meet them in person. And then, Isaac continued, I thought we might visit Laramie. Pay our respects at your family's graves. Tears sprang to Melanie's eyes. It was a subject they rarely discussed, the family she had lost to a similar raid years before. You do that? She asked softly. Of course, Isaac said simply. They're part of who you are, and who our child will be. Melanie leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Sometimes I still can't believe how fortune found us. That I decided to ride out that day, that you allowed me to stay. Not fortune, Isaac said, his arm tightening around her. Something more. Something I can't quite name, but I'm grateful for every day. As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue. From inside the house, the fire in the hearth cast a warm glow through the windows, beckoning them to the comfort within. Do you ever think about that first fire? Melanie asked. The one we built among the ashes? Isaac nodded. Often. It was the moment everything changed. For me too, she admitted. I came thinking I could help someone who'd suffered a loss like mine. I never expected to find a new beginning for myself. Life has a way of surprising us, Isaac observed. Sometimes cruelly, but sometimes with gifts we never thought to ask for. As if in agreement, the baby kicked vigorously, causing Melanie to laugh and place Isaac's hand where he could feel the movement. I think our daughter or son agrees, she said. Later, as they prepared for bed, Melanie paused at the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. The ranch spread before her, peaceful and thriving, so different from the scene of devastation she had first encountered. What are you thinking? Isaac asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her and their unborn child. "That home isn't a place," Melanie replied, leaning back against him. "It's wherever we build it together." Isaac kissed the top of her head, grateful beyond words for the woman who had sat beside him in his darkest hour and shown him how to rebuild from ashes. Not just a house or a ranch, but a life worth living, a future worth fighting for, and a love that had transformed them both. Outside, the Montana wind swept across the plains, carrying the promise of tomorrow. Inside, the fire they had kindled together burned bright, warming their home and lighting their way forward, step by step, day by day, into the life they were creating together.